All right. Good afternoon. My name is Arnel Andrenal. Welcome to this online forum called System Upgrade for a Strong Economy, Vibrant Democracy, and Inclusive Society. This forum is organized by Tandem or Tanggulang Demokrasya in cooperation with Publicus Asia and APCA or the Association of Political Consultants in Asia. In this forum, we will talk about our constitution as a system under which our economy, democracy, and society ran, and the proposals to upgrade the system through constitutional reform. We are looking specifically at two proposals. One is the Bayanihan Federalism Draft, a constitutional draft proposal prepared by a constitutional consultative committee formed and organized under President Duterte's Executive Order Number 10, headed by former Chief Justice Reynato Puno, a summary of which will be presented to us later by no other than Father Ronnie Aquino, whom I will also introduce later. We will also be looking at another draft called the People's Draft, which has been making the rounds through social media and online forums, integrating suggestions from different people's groups or crowds. Hence, it is also known as the crowdsourced constitution, a summary of which will be presented to us later by attorney Dindo Donato, whom I will also introduce before his presentation. After both presentations, we will hear from our panel of reactors. And now I will present the members of this panel of reactors. I would like to introduce them now. First, may I introduce a personal friend of mine, a friend of constitutional reform for a long time as well, Mr. Orion Perez Dundum. He is a graduate of Ateneo University where he finished computer science and management information system as a double major. He has been working on the IT industry and proudly calls himself an OFW, working for a European IT company in Singapore. He is the principal co-founder of the Correct movement, where correct means constitutional reform and rectification for economic competitiveness and transformation. Medyo mahaba, kaya correct na lang. And which aims to educate Filipinos about the importance of constitutional reform. He is also part of the Federalism Study Group, along with former Secretary Gary Olivar, contributing to the book, The Quest for a Federal Republic. He also contributed as a pro bono resource in the DILG-IITF 2019 workshop, which led to the establishment of the Constitutional Reform Movement, or CORE movement. Some people might remember Orion as one of the champions of the 1990s era television quiz show, Battle of the Brains. Folks, let me introduce Mr. Orion Perez Dumdum. Orion, welcome to this forum.
Thanks for having me.
You're in Singapore, right?
Yes, I'm in Singapore and it's Chinese New Year.
Yes,
Gong Xi Fa Cai.
So how's this pandemic in Singapore?
It's actually being managed pretty well here. There's very few infections now, and yeah, the people are able to now basically go about with their business, but they just need to wear masks all the time.
They're having vaccines now. People are having vaccines.
Yes, that's right. We're having them in phases, no? So mga frontliners, people who work in hospitals, or people who have to do a lot of face-to-face activities are getting free vaccines already.
All right.
And then everybody else who works and lives in Singapore long term is going to be given free vaccine.
All right. Good for you. Now, may I introduce another member of our panel of reactors, Reverend Father Eliseo R. Mercado Jr., or Father June, holds a master's degree in theology and philosophy and holds a doctorate degree in divinity and humanity. He completed work in Islamic studies and Arabic studies at the Gregorian University in Rome and at the Oriental Institute in Cairo. He's a Fulbright New Century Scholar in a postdoctoral program, and under a Fulbright Senior Fellowship, he was appointed adjunct professor at the Graduate School at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. from 2002 to 2004. He is an academic, having been president of the Notre Dame University in Cotabato City from 1992 to 2002, and president of the Notre Dame Educational Association from 2000 to 2002. He is a well-known Mindanao peace advocate and an expert in the role of Islam in the Philippines. He was designated chairperson of the Independent Ceasefire Monitoring Committee of the Philippine government and the MILF. He was the chair of the NAMFREL in the ARMM from 1986 to 2002. He is an international lecturer, recipient of multiple awards, including 2 presidential citations and 2 separate honorary doctorates. He is the chair of CUSOG Mindanao, the Forum of All Mindanao Leaders. Father June also teaches at the Notre Dame University Graduate School and the San Beda University Graduate School of Laws in Manila. Welcome to the program, Father Eliseo R. Mercado Jr. Father
Okay,
June, magandang hapon po.
thank you very much. Thank you for having me in this discussion.
How are you, Father June? Saan kayo ngayon nandun?
I'm here in Cotabato City and safe and sound and happy in my own hermitage.
Good for you, Father. Welcome to the forum.
Yes.
Now, of course, last but not least, may I introduce our third panelist this afternoon, Secretary Gary B. Olivar. He holds a master's degree from the UP School of Economics and an MBA from the Harvard Business School. He was the economic spokesperson of former President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo, and he was an associate professor of finance at the Asian Institute of Management. He's a fellow of the Foundation for Economic Freedom, also director of the Center for Strategy, Enterprise, and Intelligence, or SENSEI, which provides strategic research and advisories to selected public and private organizations. He presently consults with the DILG Center for the Federalism and Constitutional Reform, where he helped draft a new federal and parliamentary constitution. He focused on liberalizing the economic provisions of the Constitution. His column appears weekly, I think every Tuesday, in the Manila Standard. It is my pleasure to welcome to our forum Secretary Gary B. Olivar. Magandang hapon po, Sec. Sec Olivar. Nawawala yata. Sec Gary still here?
Naka-mute yata siya.
Okay. Magandang hapon po sa inyo lahat. Salamat Arnel sa napaka-generous na pakilala. Lalong-lalo na sa ating dalawang kasamaan mula sa Kaparian, Father June and Father Ronnie. It is a pleasure and a privilege. Alam nyo, with Ash Wednesday coming up, hopefully papayagan na kami ni ni Archbishop Pavilion na mag-serve ng mag-impose ng ashes at masyadong maigpit ang ang aming Archbishop sa aming mga lay minister dito sa sa simbahan namin sa San Juan.
Nasa San Juan po kayo. So how's everything there?
Okay naman. I think fully ordered na kami para sa vaccine. Si Mayor Zamora, I believe ang pinili niya is Moderna.
Okay.
So I'm looking forward to that. Yun daw pinakamalakas eh. Parang red horse ng vaccine yun eh. Parang red horse.
Welcome po, Gary. Now, since everyone knows the distinguished members of our panel of reactors, we can now proceed to the meat of our program. At this point, may I introduce our first speaker, Father Ronnie Aquino, who will present to us the Biannual Federal Constitution Draft. So actually, Father Ronnie does not need an introduction, but of course we have to do it here. Father Ronnie, to most everyone, did his bachelor's degree in philosophy at the University of Santo Tomas, graduating summa cum laude. He had master's in arts in philosophy also at UST, again graduating summa cum laude, and completed his doctorate, majoring in philosophy, and again, as everyone now would have guessed, graduating summa cum laude. He is an ordained priest of the Archdiocese of Tuguegarao. He completed his Doctor of Jurisprudence degree, major international law at the Columbia Pacific University in California in 1993. He was research fellow at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium and fellow of the Commonwealth Judicial Education Institute in Halifax, Nova Scotia in Canada. In 2003, he did studies on philosophy at Cambridge University in England. He also authored books in philosophy and law, annotated Supreme Court reports, and a regular contributor to those various publications, including the Lawyer's Review. He was a professor of law at the Cagayan Colleges in Tuguegarao and Professor of Philosophy at the University of Santo Tomas. He is presently Professor at the Cagayan State University and Dean of the Graduate School of Law at the San Beda College. Father Ronnie has a lot of important achievements and assignments, too many to mention here. But most important to us here, he was a member of the consultative committee formed by President Duterte to review and propose a draft for the Philippine Constitution, the summary of which he will present to us here now. Friends, we are lucky to have this afternoon Father Ranilio Aquino. Father Ronnie, good afternoon po.
Good afternoon, Arnel, and good afternoon, Orion. Good afternoon, Dindo. Dindo is a well-known figure as well, and Father June, of course, is my colleague at San Beda, and Gary is a friend from long back. I'm sure, Gary, they will allow you to distribute ashes now because we are now allowed 50% of the capacity of the church. And Bishop Pabilio cannot do that by himself, no? So they will,
Father, may picture sa mga seniors eh.
they will all do that. Well, anyway, thank you for this opportunity. I have long welcomed opportunities like this because in such a gargantuan undertaking as proposing revisions to our Constitution, the more the people are involved, the better. When President Duterte formed that committee, I must say at the outset that he really left no instructions. He did not tell the committee what he wanted. And I think it was largely out of respect to the chairman of the committee, Chief Justice Renato Puno, and the vice chair was the late Senate President Aquino Pimentel, and also serving as vice chair was Justice Antonio Nachura. And they are very good constitutionalists. So I think that out of respect for them, we never set as instructed members. We had our own views and we had our own proposals. So largely, our proposal was, number one, to decentralize government. And this was because we believed that decentralization would, number one, solve the problem of the restiveness of certain regions that felt that they had been left out of the consideration, the thoughtfulness, as well as the attention of central government. Number two, because we thought that a decentralized form of government would be more responsive to exigencies such as calamities that have recently visited the country. By the way, my friends, you know that Tugigaraw was badly devastated by the recent floods. We have not yet completely arisen from this terrible calamity. In fact, many of our people are still living in shanties and makeshift houses because all of this was completely wiped away. And third, we believed on the whole that importing the centralized form of government was not the best thing that we could do in order to have a government that was responsive to the needs and aspirations of the people, admitting the fact and conceding the fact that we are really ethnically different and that we think of our future and of prosperity in different ways. So the whole concept was to divide the powers of government between federal government and the federated regions. And as between the central government and the federated regions, unlike the American model, it would be the federated regions that would be the regions of enumerated powers, which means that the powers that are not expressly granted to the regions are enjoyed by the national government. Now, one frequent accusation against our draft was that it did not pay attention to the local governments. That's not true. What we in fact did was follow the model of many federal constitutions that made local governments a concern of the federated regions. Now, we also restructured the legislature in such a way that the upper house or the other house would be truly representative of the interests of the various regions, and therefore would be elected or sent there by the regions themselves. I'm sure that one provision that is of interest to this group is what we did with the economic provisions, particularly those on national patrimony and the like. And many people say, we are disappointed that this committee practically changed nothing in respect to the patrimony provisions, the economic provisions, and kept them as conservative as they were under the 1987 Constitution. Well, let me just say this first. Our principle was, where the 1987 Constitution proves to be workable and proves to be good, let's not change it for the sake of changing it. But where we need to change it, such as the structure of the legislature, the powers of the executive, and the division between national and federated regions, we had to introduce some changes. What people don't see is that in respect to the economic provisions, let us say, the EDU, exploration, development, utilization of natural resources, while textually we retained the 60-40 requirement, we, however, said at the end of the provision, Congress may by law change the voting capital requirement under this section, considering the federal and regional interests of the people. That's a very big change because it allows for flexibility and it allows Congress to make the determination that we felt as a committee we could not do, because that calls for plenty of study, that calls for an analysis of the situation, and that's better responded to by legislation rather than by a constitutional provision. In fact, my study of different constitutions, one of the subjects I teach with Father June at San Beda is comparative constitutions. And I hardly find any constitution that sets out limitations in this regard. That's largely left to legislation. So we did that also. For example, in regard to ownership of or lease of land, we also left that. We also said Congress may by law change the requirements for lease of alienable lands. Therefore, the monumental thing we did with that provision is to allow for the flexibility by giving Congress the power to change the proportions that are set in the Constitution in response to what Congress studied and perceived to be the needs of both the national government and the federated regions. Now, we were very careful about dividing the powers between the federated regions and the central government. But you will be interested to know that socio-economic development planning and the creation of sources of revenue, as well as financial administration and management within the region, were left to the federated regions themselves. So the whole concept was that each federated region would be a revenue generating area or region. Now, nobody is saying that this is a perfect draft. We are not making that claim at all. In fact, if anything at all, when we submitted the draft, we said this is the beginning of a debate, and it should be a national debate involving as many people as possible, so that in spirit, Dindo's undertaking is exactly our undertaking. Let the people speak out their minds, and let's find out how this draft can be fine-tuned. But the whole thrust of the draft was really the establishment of a federal republic. So thank you very much, Arnel.
Thank you so much, Father Ronnie. I have some clarifications though. You mentioned na according to the draft proposed by the committee, Congress can change by law the percentage of ownership of businesses.
Yes, yes.
How was it written? Natanggal na po yung 60-40 provisions.
Hindi sa tanggal, pero we put at the end, for example, in section 4, no, EDU of natural resources, we added a fourth paragraph that says Congress may by law change the voting capital requirement under this section considering the federal and regional interests of the people. And then another is in regard to lands of the public domain and the ownership of alienable land. The percentage is still there, but we again said Congress may by law change the requirements for lease of alienable lands under this section.
Okay, Father, that's clear. Also, we will still have a presidential system under the proposed draft, isn't it, Father?
Yes, there would be a president. The difference, however, was that the president and the vice president would be voted for in tandem.
All right.
So yes, so that we don't have a system where the president either prays for the death of the vice president or the vice president prays for the death of the president, but both help each other. Yes.
All right. But under the proposed draft, meron bang difference in power po ang president versus the present constitution?
Yes, insofar, for example, as his power of the regions is concerned, these powers are curtailed because the regions have powers of their own that are not dependent on the president.
All right. That's all. That's about it. Yun lang po ang
Yes,
difference.
yes.
All right. Now, in the draft, Father, yung all federal states are already identified. Are they?
Yes, well, we settled for 18 federated regions. 16 throughout the country, and the two, one is Bangsamoro, the other is the federated region of the Cordilleras.
So among the others, ano po yung basis ng division?
Well, mostly it was contiguity, but we also considered ethnicity. But the main criterion was really contiguity.
If merong certain states may some member
Excuse me, Arnel, you asked about the powers of the president. Well, yes, of course, there were some powers that were taken away. For example, the power to appoint justices of the Supreme Court. At the present time, a president can pack the Supreme Court. If there happen to be many vacancies during his tenure, he can pack the Supreme Court. But under our proposal, Congress, the Supreme Court, and the Constitutional Court would have the power to appoint members of the Supreme Court.
All right. Now, with the division ng federal state, halimbawa, there are members or community within those states na they don't want to be a member of some state but wanted to be a member of another state. Is there a way to do that?
There is a mechanism for that, yes.
All right.
There's a mechanism for that.
I remember, Father, you were quoted to have preferred the parliamentary system during the deliberations ng committee.
Yes, I was. I still advocate that, although I was severely beaten and when the voting came, this is what happened, no? When I was drafting my paper on the Westminster Parliament, I asked my colleagues, are you going to support my proposal? And they told me, oh, sigurado yan, Father. Oh. So I delivered my talk on the Westminster Parliament. And when the voting came, it turned out that my vote was the only vote in favor of the Westminster Parliament. Yeah.
All right. Anyway, thank you so much, Father Ronnie. It is our honor to have you here and
I'm glad.
and
Sure.
to present the draft. Now, maybe move on to a presentation of the People's Draft this time. I am happy to introduce the next presenter, Attorney Dindo Donato, of course. Attorney Demosthenes Donato, or Attorney Dindo, is the General Counsel of Tanggulang Demokrasya, or TANDEM. TANDEM is a people's organization advocating, among other, systems change, and he is a partner at the Donato and Zarato law firm, where he handles mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures, cross-border investments, due diligence, and service and employment contracts. After Attorney Dindo's engagement with system change has been for a long time been influenced by his civic work extending legal assistance to indigenous peoples, landless farmers, subsistence fisher folk, and rural workers. He obtained his Bachelor's of Laws from the Ateneo University in 1988, his Master's of Laws in Banking, Corporate, and Finance Law from Fordham University in New York in 1995. He was admitted to the bar in 1989. Attorney Dindo, welcome, sir. You now have the floor. Attorney,
Magandang hapon. Salamat, Arnel.
I believe you have a presentation. Would you like to share it?
Yes, sir. Good
Sure.
afternoon, everyone. Please
Okay.
allow me to share. I prepared a short PowerPoint. Is it seen, sir?
Yes. Hindi pa lang naka-presentation mode. There.
Okay. Thank you po. Today I will present the People's Draft. To be clear, this is just a working draft. Okay. This has been in progress for like 15 years already as of today. Okay. Two reasons why we created this draft. Number one, we have come to believe that problems are not only in the way the laws are implemented, it's also in the way the laws are made. Yung nandyan na. Okay? Second reason is that, of course, we really appreciate the effort of the present and the past governments to support system change. Yes, however, our approach in our engagement with the different sectors is materially different. So we really have no choice but to write it on our own. Okay. So before I go into the features of the People's Draft, I will give you first some background on the state of the nation. This is the reason why we believe system change is required. You have 100 million people, almost 20%, 20 to 25% in poverty. You have 46 billion labor, 10% jobless. You multiply that with the lowest minimum wage, that's 1/2 trillion every year. Anyway, there's a bright spot. OFW, highest dollar earner. BPO, second highest dollar earner. Do they have a common element? Yes. OFWs work for foreign employers. BPO, they are mostly foreign owned. Let us now go to the other side. Okay. Public utilities, public utility industry. That's probably the most important industry in the economy because it affects all other industries. So after 85 years of Filipino first policy, what do we have now? Okay. We have the slowest and costliest internet, second highest power cost, water shortage, costliest and most dangerous domestic shipping. And if you look at the related industry of construction, 73% labor violations and more than 50% safety. Not only that, during the pandemic, the Department of Finance said 60% of the economy was concentrated in Metro Manila and Calabarzon. That surprised me a lot. Anyway, let's go to politics, the political system. What do we have now? You have one person controlling the entire executive branch. This person appoints all the judges. He cannot be removed except by impeachment, which is practically an impossible remedy. And of course, he cannot be sued. So what do you call this system? Is this what they call authoritarian system, one-man rule? No, actually, political analysts call it the presidential system. That's what we have now. Okay, same system is followed in the LGU. LGUs, you have provinces, municipalities, and barangays. They all have overlapping territories. And of course, if you want to run for president, vice president, senator, that's really good luck. Your constituency is the entire nation. That's a very expensive. Finally, in our engagement, in my engagement with Lumad groups, Muslim groups, I've come to realize something they all missed. Our nation is tri-people, Christians, Muslims, and Lumads. Accordingly, our ideology, starting with the Constitution, must take this into consideration. So how does the society treat them now? Right now, almost 80% of Lumad lands remain unrecognized. The sultanates also unrecognized because of the constitution. Let me now go to the features of the People's Draft. We believe it is the simplest, 10 pages only. 70% of the language we just copy. If it is the language is there, we copy to the last period, to the last comma. Familiar terms we use, of course, so that people will understand. We also say this is the broadest draft. Why? It covers economics, foreign investment liberalization, open now with safeguards. Okay? It also provides collective rule. Okay? That's basically parliament at the national level and council type at the local level. Okay? This is a shift from one-man rule, as I explained earlier, to collective rule. Regional decentralization. Here we follow the bottom-up approach. We allow the regions to decide for themselves how they want to go. And we provide three options. First option, the lowest, is like a regional authority. It's just like SBMA, except that it's big. Okay? Second option, BARM, autonomous region. Third option, sub-state, the full sub-state with its sovereignty. Okay? Now, for the second and third, of course, you have to win in a plebiscite, just like in BARM. Okay? This one is probably the most important. This one is based on a study prepared by Mr. Rodolfo Vicera, former Director General of the House Planning and Budget Department. Because of the restructuring under the People's Draft, he said we can come up with a savings based on the budget now, 13.5 billion savings every year. On the other hand, if we will create new government structures at the regions, regional executive, regional legislature, regional judiciary, that will probably cost us additional 30 to 40 billion. We promote political efficiency, no duplication. Why? Because it's unicameral. No deadlock. Why? The executive and legislative branches are merged. No overlapping. Why? We consolidate all government powers in municipality and in the city. No bloating. The mayors will be the provincial board, and if your region would like to have its own autonomous region or even a sub-state, we will not elect another set. Just the congressmen and the mayors who are already elected by the people will serve ex officio. By the way, this is not new. This is how the 1943 Constitution is drafted. No excessive politics. Mayors will just appoint the barangay. Okay? As far as we know, barangays already have associations. They have their president. They elect every year. So they just nominate and mayors will just formally appoint. This one is the problem generated in mass media. Very clear, no term extension, not for anyone. Okay, so we have to write that down very clearly. No term reduction. So senators who will win in 2022, don't worry, you will serve your full term 6 years. No disruption for any official of government. And if I may go back, sorry. Political provisions which are sensitive will take effect only in 2025. So, okay? So people are saying that you're doing this for your own benefit, you will run, you will all get the powers. No, no, no. Nothing like that, please. All political changes will be in 2025. 5-year term for congressman, this is a compromise. Before it was 6, now it's 3. And people complain, 3 is too short. First year you learn, second year you work, third year you campaign. So in the end, we get short-term programs. No reorganization of the Supreme Court. In other words, this is what we believe in. No touch with the Supreme Court. Whether or not you like them, no touch. This is the anchor while we reorganize the entire government. This is parliament. Okay, people say that if you shift to a parliamentary rule, a collective voting, you will lose the right to select the chief executive or the president. Is that true? No, it's not true. That's wrong, actually. Why? We just use the process in an electoral college election. See? That's how the ballot will look like. You have a candidate for Congress. it's team voting. And the nominee for president, you believe that the nominee for president is more important, then you choose. Okay? You will not lose the right to vote for chief executive in a parliamentary system as long as we follow the electoral college style. Here, this is our main proposal to address the problem of domination by rich and famous candidates and by family dynasties. What are we saying? We shift from voting at large to voting by district. Okay? For example, in a city, one congressman, 10 councilors, the congressman voted at large. That's his district. Okay? But the councilors, if there are 10 of them, you divide the area into 10 sub-districts. In this case, we believe that in smaller areas, the unfunded and relatively unknown candidates will have a better chance of winning. For us, that's political democracy. That's the way to address political dynasties. If you want to be mayor, okay, you will need less votes. Why? You only need to win in 6 districts out of 10. 51 as against 36. Assuming you have 100 voters, 2 candidates, and everybody will vote. 3-term limit is there. That's based on public feedback. Family dynasty provision is there. All means to remove sitting officials are there, both from presidential and parliamentary systems. We got them all and put it there. Dissolve Congress, no confidence vote, midterm recall for the first time, Congressman. Impeachment, we limit that only to the Supreme Court. That's actually a barrier against removal, this impeachment requirement. And in our experience dealing with the electoral reform like COMELEC, that it's really almost impossible to hold them accountable for as long as they are protected by this impeachment clause. So in the people's draft, they are downgraded. These commissions, they are all downgraded to statutory bodies. And therefore, their commissioners can be removed anytime, just like any other public official. Only the Supreme Court is insulated. In regional decentralization, don't worry, there will be no new taxes, no new laws on business. And if you choose the first level regional authority, again, no additional budget. Finally, on society, the People's Draft affirms the principles started in 1973 Constitution, followed up by the 87, and now the IPRA, Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. So we reaffirm that. And here, for the first time, we move to repeal the prohibition against the recognition of royalty, which we got from American doctrine. For them, that's applicable because they rebelled against the UK monarchy. For us, we believe it's not. We have homegrown royalty here, but unfortunately, because of the Constitution, we cannot recognize them. Unlike in Japan or UK, where they are recognized at least as social cultural institutions. Finally, national security. Wag ho tayo matakot sa balkanization. No? There's no such thing. We have an express provision there that even if you're a sub-state, you have no right to secede, no military and police forces, only internal security forces, meaning government security guards. Okay? Yung secession, if the regions want to secede, fine. That's another plebiscite. You have to amend the People's Draft. And you have to win nationally. So I don't see how you can do that. How do we move forward from here? We do things like this webinar, information, education, communication campaign, social media. We'll try to move into the traditional tri-media soon. And we will try to build a coalition. This is probably the most important. Number 3, CSPS, Clergy, Security, Polity, Society. Everybody must work in, must join. If not, we will not move forward. And number 4, probably by March or about that time, we will file a petition for indirect initiative with the House and the Senate. That's just to be clear, this is not the usual initiative that requires 6 to 7 million signatures, okay? This is just technically an appeal for the House and the Senate to consider the draft. At least what is inside there, they can make their own, and we will just use the draft as like a checklist. That is how we will be moving forward from here on. Yun lang po. Maraming salamat.
Well, thank you so much, Attorney Dindo Donato. Of course, I have some clarifications to make. You called it the People's Draft. Bakit natin tinawag na People's Draft ito?
It was just we met with with stakeholders, advocates. It was a word that came out. There was a proposal to use federalism, but it's not exactly federalism, because when it is approved, it's still unitary. The move towards that is still up to the local region, and we are working on actually the CSPS. Basically, that's the entire nation working together and on a common agenda. Clergy, security, polity, and society. Society meaning civil society, business, labor, youth, lumad groups, Muslim groups, everybody. Okay?
Yes, dito sa People's Draft, nawala na yung 60-40 provisions.
Yes, sir. We have. That's what I said earlier, that we wrote our own because our approach is different. With respect to investments, our approach is to take them all out now. For those who want to limit it, let them take the burden of passing a law. Anyway, we will not touch the land. There's a small-scale mining and micro-enterprise. That's it. And also, we will have a safeguard. Like this is based on the U.S. practice. They have this thing called CFIUS, Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States. They can investigate and suspend and bar any foreign investment in the U.S. if it threatens their national security. Okay, so you have we have a similar body like that. We have Congress who can pass a law, and we will require reciprocity in a professional practice.
All right. The People's Draft in itself does not create federal states, right? So,
No, sir.
paano
No, sir.
mako-constitute themselves into state yung mga group of people?
They have to do it like they did it in BARM. There's a
Right.
petition, you hold a plebiscite, and you have to win. And
Alright.
then that region, and you have a choice there. If you want a autonomous region, if you want a sub-state, that's up to the people. We as much as possible, we try to recognize the right to self-determination. We leave it to them.
All right. Ang pinakamagandang part na nakita ko sa People's Draft is yung sinasuggest mo na may savings siya. Sino nga nag-compute ng
Yes, sir. That is a study by Mr. Rodolfo Becerra. We will make it public, post it in the Facebook page of the people. He's the former Director General of the House Budget Committee.
All right.
House Budget Department, sorry.
Now, nabanggit mo kanina, Attorney Dindo, no touch tayo sa Supreme Court, right?
Yes, sir.
So how are Supreme Court justices appointed with the new draft?
Same, sir, same. What I mean is those justices now, they have their term, they have their tenure, no touch. It's perfectly respected under the new. Is it 70 years old? Fine. In other words, it's as if nothing happened to them.
All right. Again, thank you so much, Attorney Dindo, and again to Father Ronnie. Now let us hear from our panel of reactors. First, I would like to get the reaction of Mr. Orion Perez Dumdum. Orion, as an OFW and a longtime advocate of constitutional reform, what can you say about each draft?
Well, okay, I've been waiting to say this, no? So, actually, when we start off with the Bayanihan draft, no, that was presented by Father Ronnie, I was very much, I was really very hopeful when it started, and I unfortunately got quite disappointed when the voting for the form of government turned out the way it was, no? So. I sympathize fully with Father Ronnie, because I know he was pushing for the parliamentary system, and even if it went with the hybrid, it should have still at least won. But then it didn't, because there were too many people kind of stuck in the old, and dito na tayo nasanay and all that, no? So sayang lang because being an OFW, living in a country that uses a parliamentary system and having traveled and worked in long-term projects in countries that use a parliamentary system, I've seen it with my own eyes how it works, and it works really well. Talagang may self-correcting mechanisms ang parliamentary system, which sayang lang, the huge majority of the people in that group, not naman huge majority, but just enough people who could have that slight majority ended up voting for a system that is, frankly speaking, considered outdated from the prevailing literature in political science. So I mean, it's pretty much out there. If we do all the research, kitang-kita na presidential system bulok talaga. kahit anong gawin natin, bulok talaga ang presidential system. Any attempt to stick to it is a mistake. Look at the USA, ang gulo-gulo na nila. So even the USA is turning out to be a hellhole because of their system of government. And unless they change that, they will continue to be in this kind of mess that they're in. And having said that, yun ang nasasayangan lang ako, no? And again, my sympathies with Father Ronnie because he was really pushing for a parliamentary system. Now, in terms of the case of the economic provisions, again, nasayangan din ako talaga doon kasi best practices. I mean, being an OFW and working in Singapore, I've seen this is a country that has thrived, become a first world country when it used to be a third world country because of its openness to foreign direct investors. Zero restrictions in the constitution. I looked also at Malaysia. They also don't have restrictions in their constitution. Practically all countries don't have restrictions in their constitution, and yet we ended up retaining them in that Bayanihan draft. And that does not send a strong enough signal to the international community to tell them that we are serious about opening up and bringing in the jobs so that naman makauwi naman sana kaming mga OFW. Imbis na kami ay nasa malayo, nasa Pilipinas na sana kami dahil nasa Pilipinas na sana mga trabaho. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. So sayang talaga because although nandyan yung clause that says na Congress has the ability to make changes in the sharing proportions of who owns, no? Parang ganun nga yung sinasabi. But because the offending provisions were not removed, the signal is not there. Parang yun nga, si Peter Wallace commented that it was very disappointing na hindi natanggal yung 60-40 and other anti-foreign direct investment restrictions because this should have been the signal to everyone around the world na pwede na kayong pumunta sa Pilipinas at mag-set up ng kumpanya at sana dumami ang mga trabaho para hindi na namin kailangan maging OFW. And this is me, an OFW here in Singapore, speaking to everybody who's present na sana na magawan talaga ng paraan to para hindi na kami nalalayo sa aming mga pamilya. Luckily, kasama ko pamilya ko dito, no problem. Pero yung vast majority, siguro 90% ng mga OFW, hindi nila kasama mga pamilya nila. So they're away and we have the breakup of families because of this. I've seen it with my own eyes. I see it every day na nangyayari yung ganito. Dahil sa pagkakalayo, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years yung iba na nagkakalayo sa kanilang pamilya. Ayan, break up. Ang mga anak, ano nangyayari? Walang gabay. So I've seen that and I don't like it. And therefore talagang we need to fix the economic system of the Philippines to be more open to foreign direct investors. And the best way to do that is to get rid of those restrictions. So between the two drafts, talagang lumalabas na the people's draft is a clear improvement because of that fact na unang-una medyo parliamentary yung dating niya, no? Parliamentary system yung dating niya, and it also has removed the anti-foreign direct investment restrictions. So if we, for example, adopted the people's draft, we would actually end up showing to the rest of the world that we are serious about opening up to foreign direct investors in the same way that China opened up to foreign direct investors and is now a superpower, that Vietnam has also done the same and is now one of the fastest growing countries in the region, one of the parang kumbaga sweet spots, one of the top students kumbaga parang ganon. And we know Singapore, this is where I am. Singapore used to be poorer than the Philippines, and now it is one of the richest countries in the world, all because it was open to foreign direct investors. Now, I think the last comment I'll just make is, for me, being very much into best practices, my suggestion is that there should be an option that we can probably have no term limits, because according to the and this is for all drafts, this goes for all drafts, because term limits has been proven by the research of Dr. Pablo Kerubin, by Dr. Yuko Kasuya, and so many other researchers, that term limits actually are bad. They've actually caused more harm than good. They have actually caused the proliferation of more dynasties. They have actually caused the deterioration of quality of legislators, because everybody becomes a newbie at some point. So parang there are so many unintended consequences. Maganda on paper yung idea na ililimit mo yung term, pero yung pala, the research shows that it's not good. So if there is a way that we can adopt this, and first of all, I guess, educate Filipinos that term limits are actually not good, I think we can make progress. Now, I'm coming from a point of view of global best practices. In the company that I work for, the companies that I've worked for, which are all in the IT industry, we always talk about global best practices. And here in Singapore, the government always talks about learning from global best practices. I think it's time that we all Filipinos, started adopting that, rather than sticking to ano yung nakasanayan na natin.
Yes,
That's all I had to say.
Ryan, very clear yung points mo, pero you did not comment on the federal style ng the two
Yes. Here we go. Here, yes.
Ano
Thank you for that. Yes.
Style na yun?
Yung isa kasi, yung sa the first one, which is the Bayanihan draft, it's a top-down approach, Parang ini-impose niya kasi yung system of federalism na, okay, ito na yung parang this number of regions, kayo na. Whereas in the actually, if we present the style of the people's draft to the economic cluster of the administration, and if we recall, the economic cluster actually had they had their misgivings about the Bayanihan draft, because they felt that it would be a very abrupt change in terms of the fiscal management of the country. Whereas if we went with the people's draft, which is a bit more gradualist, a bit more evolving, it would actually allay those fears na parang biglaan ang dating. So this is what I feel, na parang if we took a more gradualist approach to federalism, we could very clearly allay those fears on the fiscal and economic side that the economic managers were having their issues on. So sa tingin ko, yun talaga, bottom up is actually more manageable, and it's the one that actually clearly shows that it's more democratic, actually, if we think about it.
All right. Thank you so much, Ryan. I can see
Okay.
your passion dito
Yeah.
for a very long time.
Pasensya na, I'm an OFW, and I'm very active in the OFW community here. Have been for so many years. I've been on OFW since 2000, and I've seen so many broken families, and I hate seeing this problem.
Sure. Next, let us ask naman Father Eliseo Mercado for his reaction. Father June, coming from Mindanao, how do you see the drafts, especially relating to your experience in the economic situation, knowledge of the peace and order situation there? Father June, what can you say about the drafts?
Okay, I would like to begin by stating something very positive, that both draft, the people's draft, as well as the Bayanihan drafts, should be the beginning of national debates, national consultations.
Right.
Because this has been very much lacking. When Father Ronnie and his commission, Renato Puno's commission, finished the draft, submitted to the president submitted to Congress, I think that was the end of it. Rather than generating or the beginning of a national debate on said constitution, that did not happen. So similarly also, the people's draft, though it is what we call people's source, but you still see the national debate, because for me, constitution should be a product of a national consensus. First and foremost is that people, oh, it's in the air that we need constitutional change. And it should be in the air, what kind of system do we adopt? So, and people debated by region, people debated by island, or people debated by LGUs, and people debate that in the House. So that's something very positive. Both drafts seek consultation, more debates, and more consensus. That is number one point. The second point I would like to begin to start is that there is a big difference between the Bayanihan, of course, though there are many convergences, and the People's Draft. The People's Draft is amendment the Constitution because I do see that they see the defects of the Constitution and they seek to respond to it by amending it, such as just as the 4060 or liberalizations in foreign investment, and similarly on many things, you see. While the Bayanihan is really revising the Constitution because it is a system change. And I like the language used in the Bayanihan when you make a distinction between the federal state and the federal government and the powers of the federated regions, and these powers are enumerated. If you want an example of this, will be the new Republic Act 11054, which is the organic law for the Bangsamoro, when you have the enumerated powers of the autonomous government. So though it was very extensive enumeration, unlike the 9054 that created the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao, it was very constrictive by the 1987 Constitution. The nine powers enumerated in the Constitution for the autonomous region. But it was breached by the Republic Act 11354 by enumerating 58 powers or 56 powers of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. So in the proposal of the Bayanihan Constitution, the federated regions will clip the powers of the president or the executive, and will clip also the powers of the national federal government, because only not enumerated will be continued to be enjoyed by the federal government. So there are many powers that are now will be delegated to the federated regions. So that's why it's really a revision of the Constitution, while the what we call this, the people's source constitution will be amending the constitution. So perhaps I was thinking that, oh, perhaps the people's can be what we call the pedagogy moving towards the federated region, because as my companion Dum Dum said, or Dum Dum ba yun, said that
Yeah.
it might be very radical. Immediately, the federated, we are not used to that kind of thinking, though we are used to that thinking in Mindanao because we have been
Okay.
advocating for federalism for a long time. You see,
Okay.
I'm a member of the Federal Alliance here with President Duterte. That's why at this campaign, it was really, the flagship is federalism. So we will be along that line. But people in Luzon and people in the Visayas, this is something new. We have been advocating this for the past 25 years, and it was not picked up. Only when President Duterte became president, then it became a currency nationally. But before that, we only people of Mindanao speak of federalism. Then there's a big distinction also, because when you speak of federated regions, enumerated power, you don't speak only of decentralization. Oh, it's decentralization, of course. But more on the federated region, we speak of what is inherent powers of the region in their local affairs. Because in decentralization, all powers emanate from the national government. That is 1987 Constitution. But perhaps in the revision of Constitution, you recognize the inherent power of the regions in their local affairs. So when it is written and enumerated in the federated powers of the federated region, that it is a recognition of that inherent powers, that simply decentralizing the national powers to the region. So that is only a distinction that I would like to make. Then perhaps what is important also is that we are trying to address, my good companion, on the investment, you see, 40-60. I like actually the Biannual formula that it leaves it to the Congress. Of course, it's still by camera, but Congress to legislate. Because you don't constitutionalize, you see, such as economic provisions at 40. There is what we call there 40-60, but whether to change that, to modify it, I will leave it to the representatives of the people, and that is Congress. It is by law Congress can pass legislation changing the voting rights of this investment from 40-60. And many other provisions, I think, should be done likewise. Instead of putting black and white in the Constitution, why not allow the debates in the People's Elected Assembly of Congress? And that will be more democratic. And that is actually in tune with the parliamentary system, because in parliament, the parliament is sovereign, and parliament is sovereign, you see. So I would like also to recognize the plenipotentiary of Congress or the parliament, particularly in terms of the details, you see, details. So I like that caveat, you see, that Congress by law can pass and amend that particular provision, or perhaps relax a particular provision in the Constitution. And because that will, when you say Congress, it will require public hearing, public debates. So, which is more important, because if it is in the Constitution, it requires plebiscite, and the plebiscite you all have yes and no. So, in terms of that's that. Then I would like to address three issues. The first issue is on the issue of security, police. So, and then no secession, all those enumerated in the no secession, police and AFP, and then only the security guard. You know, that is the big debate here in our area, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. The police, you see, whether the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region will have their own police, but there is a national legislation, it's the Constitution, it's a national police. But that is changed. Before, the police is not national, it is local. The local executive has control over the police. And we have also the Philippine Constabulary, which is the national, which is under the federal government. I believe that certain policing in the community should be local. So it should not be national. We always have, that's why I never like this national. I'm from Mindanao. We don't like that everything is centralized in the national government. That's why I believe that the armed forces of the Philippines, national, because that is the security of the state. But when you say policing, that is the security of the citizens in the local area. It's local, you see. So let the elected leaders, the local, the mayor, the councilors, the governors, should have control over the police, and that is a local affair, not a national affair. If you want to create a national police like before, the Philippine Constabulary, it's another legislation. But I would like a more control of the citizens as well as the local officials on the police matter, because it is public safety of the citizens in local affairs. And then the other one that I would like to mention is the recognition of the Sultanate, etc. You see, because of the Americans, well, we what we call resurrecting the Sultanate. That's a big question that I want to raise. While there is the Sultanate of Maguindanao that are divided into two major before, the upper river and the lower river. But now we have hundreds of sultanates. In Tolano, practically every barangay has a sultanate. So in here, like example, in Cotabato, we have the sultanate of every town. And then of course, there are so many claimants in the sultanate of Sulu. Are you resurrecting something that is no longer a currency, while the traditional family continues to live and they have their own piedam, like example, as I said, the Siswat control the Dinaigo, that all the Siswat, they have control 5 municipalities in the first district, similarly in Sulu, but the Sultanate is no longer there. They're integrated in the local government, and they control the local government, and the local government is their Sultanate. So my point only, what are you reviving in the revival of the Sultanate? So that's a big question. We are perhaps very romantic. We are very romantic when we think of Sultanate, but it's not on the ground. My point is that Sultanate should be on the ground. Then the indigenous people lands, you see, even our Republic Act 11054 recognizes the IPRA, but there are fine laws, you see, on the indigenous people, on the ancestral domain, on their self-determination in their ancestral domain, but we are very lacking in the implementations. So whether this will be under the federated enumerated powers of the region, or this will remain in the federal government. In the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, they are part of the enumerated powers of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. So there are not fearsome whether, because within you have the Moro and you have the non-Moro, you have the pluralism, so you have to contend with, you see, and then are the IPs better off in it is part of the federated powers of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, or they're better off under the national law, IPRA, though IPRA is recognized in the bond. The implementation of the law will be very different, region by region, or you want a national one implementation of the law. So these are all questions in details, but the devil is in the details. But personally, I believe, I would like to conclude is that I will welcome the two drafts as points for discussions, more debates, and then more consultations. And definitely it will not happen within this 1.5 years before the election. So, but we jumpstart already the discussion on the Constitution in the first term of the president that will be elected in May 2022. So, though there is so much goodwill on the part of Duterte to go federal and this constitutional change, but it lost its steam after 2 years in office. So I don't know why. I suppose there are so many reasons, 1,001 reasons. But I would like also to identify that foreign investment is not only because of the 30-40. In the Philippines, in the study of the World Bank, it's not the 40-60 that is resulting on the lack of foreign investment, but rather the stability of powers of government, the system of government, the corruption in government, all these, the 1,001, you see, that prevent foreign investment. Why Vietnam is going back to controlling ownership, they just passed in the plenum of Congress a week ago, you see, on changing again the ownership. China limited that kind of openness in the Guangzhou region, you see. So it's only actually Singapore, perhaps Malaysia also very limited. My point
Vietnam is very open, by the way. Vietnam is very open. I just
No,
want to
no,
make that clear.
the Congress
Very open.
Congress of last week, the Communist Party, the People's Congress of last week issued a mandate of changing that kind of ownership. It's only last week.
Yeah,
The Congress, People's Congress. So that's my point. You see, the politics are changing. So we don't point lang that this is the cause of lack of foreign investment in the Philippines.
I will mention that because I'm working here in Singapore, and this is one of the centers of foreign investment in the region, and I have come across a lot of face-to-face top-level executives, and they tell me the same thing. It's always, and I get to really talk to these people because I'm very active in the expat community here in Singapore.
Anyway, Ryan, our presenters will respond to that.
Yeah. I just wanted to say it is true that really the anti-foreign direct investment restrictions are the very, very starting point at which they start to say, oops, the Philippines is not for us.
All right.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Anyway,
I also wanted to mention, I actually like that part about the People's Draft, yung recognition of the sultanates. And even though the Philippines is a republic, it is possible for a republic to have recognition of sultanates, just like in Indonesia, because they have that in Yogyakarta. Right. And these sultanates can help as acting as the wali in the Bangsamoro region.
Anyway, Father Jun, anything more to say?
No. In the Bangsamoro region, the wali will be part of the appointment of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. The MILF and the MNLF will not even consider the sultanate. The appointment as wali. It is the front, you see. So I suppose similarly with the BIFF, you see. As I said, that's why when you say resurrecting, the basic question, what are you resurrecting?
All right. Anyway, Father Jun, it's always very nice to hear different insight from someone in Mindanao. Pero are we safe to say that many people in Mindanao are really pushing for constitutional reform, therefore
we are pushing for a revision of our constitution that will go for federal. And I think that is the reason why people voted for Mr. Duterte, because of the platform of federalism.
All right. And earlier you said, kailangan natin ng debates regarding this. Ito ang start ng debate natin in order to come up into a consensus. Pero we realize here in Manila, parang ayaw nila even to start a debate. In fact, even the Catholic Church itself, they're making pronouncements na they don't want even to debate on this. They just want to stop it. Paano natin ma-introduce ito, especially in the Catholic Church?
Well, the Catholic Church actually did not like to change in this 1.5 remaining terms of President Duterte.
All
They
right.
were for the constitutional change during the first 3 years of President Duterte. I think you have to make a clarification on this. The position of NASA and Caritas Catholic, when they issued that letter about 3 weeks ago, no charter change at this time. You see, at this time should be emphasized because we have only 1.5 years remaining of this present dispensation. As a matter of fact, by October, they will have the filing of candidacy. By March, they should establish their residency, no? So that means and by October.
Much besides Arnel, the position of some bishops should not be equated with the position of the entire Catholic Church in the Philippines.
Okay.
Some bishops have always been against charter change in whatever regime, under whatever circumstance.
Okay.
And these bishops are really deviants.
All right. Anyway, thank you so much, Father June, Father Ronnie, for that. Now, I would like to ask the reaction of Secretary Gary Olivar. Sec, I understand you are focusing on removing the economic restrictions from the Constitution. So I think you prefer the people's draft on that point, Secretary Olivar.
Well, let me respond in 2 parts, if you don't mind, no, Arnel. One is to basically just to give some highlights of my involvement in here, this whole campaign, by way of pointing out that there are, in fact, several drafts of a constitution, a new constitution. So if you want this to be a debating exercise, marami po tayo pwede pagdebatihan. My involvement started in 2016. Of course, this is much later than folks like Father Ronnie or Father June, no? But nung maupo po si Duterte, napasama ko sa grupo na inatasan magsulat ng PDP Laban version ng bagong constitution, when in fact we were able to introduce major changes like totally dropping the restrictive language on foreign investments, as well as introducing a federal and parliamentary setup sa atin. Tapos, after a year, nagtayo si Pangulo ng Bayanihan Concom, nakasama po si Father Ronnie, and they came up with their version. Sinabit nila, I think another year later, kay Pangulo. Si Pangulo at that point decided to set up another group that would be guided by nothing less than an interagency task force, no, to, if you will, build upon the changes proposed by the Biennial Constitution. I was part of that group as well, and we did that. Again, incorporating, ang nagustuhan ko sa Biennial Constitution, a very extensive and discussion on judicial reforms. I like that, no? Kasi yun ang kulang sa amin. Dahil wala kami abogado, sila abogado namin sa grupo, and maybe that's why it went so fast and so well, no? So, anyway, in-incorporate namin yung mga judicial reforms with some changes galing sa Puno Commission, and then again retaining, dropping the language, restrictive language, as well as a federal parliamentary approach. Sinubmit naman yan sa IATF, and to the best of my knowledge, nandyan, nakatenga lang. I imagine it's already in the hands of the different cabinet members involved. Pero yung isang napulot ko sa experience na yon, no, is ito kasi kaharap mo yung mga iba-ibang cabinet level agencies, and you would see a surprising lack of consensus even at that level, no, on something the president indicated is important to him, no. We had our own shares of opposition to meet, and of course there are always political factors which in the end have determined why in fact now the president is focusing on other things. Okay. Luckily for us, and that brings me to my second part, he seems to be supportive at least of relaxing the foreign investment restrictions, no, and if only that, no, and even at that, not by dropping all the restrictive language, as this is what we would have wanted, but simply by inserting the additional language unless otherwise provided by law, which is similar in effect to what the Biennial Constitution tries to achieve, no? Essentially making our policies more flexible and transferring the appropriate authorities to Congress, no? So nandiyan na yan, no? Pero yun lang po ang nakita natin papasa in terms of, we have Congress behind it. I think solidly we will know in the plenary next week. And I think we're starting to do one-on-ones with the senators. We may also get support from them even if we apply the higher standard of 3/5 requirement.
Three-fourths.
Three-fourths to pass amendments, no? So far, the feedback is good. Pati si Kiko Pangilinan, medyo nag-bend na ng konti, no? So who's the chairman of the Senate committee? And we expect to be called in a couple of weeks, no, to the Senate. So para sa again, it's a question of being incrementally achieving by increments, no? If you can get, and I would like this group, no, to focus on the simply on the fight to lift the economic restrictions. Firstly, because I think they're important. Obviously, that was my specialty in drafting these documents, but also because it is what is on the table right now. It is what is on the table right now. Now, having said that, okay, and I put on my DILG hat now because I've been consulting with DILG on this for the last couple of years. There's a couple of other reforms that we would also like to push. No? Kasi drinap na namin yung charter, yung constitutional reform kasi nakita namin natutulog lang sa IATF o sa aming mga bossing. So, why push it? So, ang advice sa amin ng Congress is why don't you focus on surgical amendments? So, we thought about it a lot. Aside from the federal, the restrictions on investment, we only came up, we were left with just two, no? That we are hoping also this group, maybe or the people listening to this group will help us push kahit wala pa po sa agenda ng Congress ngayon. Maybe after the new Congress is elected next year, it can be put back on the agenda. And those two surgical amendments have to do again with pushing decentralization and local empowerment. First, by amending the ERA allocation formula so that it becomes more equitable, especially for the LGUs who are smaller and poorer, okay? And then secondly, by empowering the regional development councils, making them outright, giving them line powers, budgets, planning and implementation authority, okay, so that in effect they become like an intermediate level of governance between national and local, and perhaps the seed of what will eventually become federal regions. Now, these reforms have become urgent, and maybe that's the reason why we can push them after the economic reforms, because starting next year, under the Mandanas ruling, about 500 billion pesos will be transferred from the national to the local governments. That's a lot of money. That's a major transfer of resources. And our concern is to make sure through these two other reforms we're pushing that the proceeds are, number one, the proceeds are equitably distributed by revising the ERA formula. And secondly, that they're effectively managed and implemented by interposing a new layer of governance between national and local. So, yun po ang aming focus ngayon. I mean, we have to pick our fights and we have to dig in for the long haul. No? If we can get this, the economic provisions through the plebiscite, which is scheduled to take place together with the elections next year, para sa akin, malaking bagay na yun. This is all we can get for the last 4 or 5 years of campaigning. So be it, and then let's just keep our powder dry for the second round under the new presidency.
Secretary Gary, paano po ninyo nasabi na ito lang ang tingin nyo na kayang ipasa? The economic
kasi ito lang ang meron ng may resolution of both houses, dumaan sa committee ni Congressman Garbin. Next week, hopefully it will be passed by big vote, 63-3-3, no? We expect it hopefully to be passed next year next week, no? In Congress, by Congress in plenary. At the same time, the Senate is already gearing up, no? To start its own initiative. So we're seeing movement. That's what I mean. There is no movement on any of the other things we wanted to push. Not anything suggested even in the other drafts here discussed. The only movement is on economic restrictions.
Can we say that President Duterte is not amenable doon sa push ng ibang amendments?
He is not acting on it. I can't speak to his motivations, but after getting all this initiative started, for reasons that may very well make sense to him, no, he is after all the president. What we're being, if you will, what has been left with us to focus on for the remainder of his term is relaxing the economic provisions. So
You know,
it is
Gary,
it is what it is.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sec. Now this
Gary.
time, Father
Yes,
Ronnie
Father.
and Attorney Dindo.
yeah,
will
there
make
is
their
there is a
response.
hint, no? Because after the Puno Commission, we were all wondering what happened with the draft. Why is it that after he received it, by the way, he asked us to finish it on time for his SONA,
Kaya
and
nga,
we did our
meron.
job. We finished it on time for the SONA, but we were expecting him to push very strongly for it at the SONA. Aside from thanking us in very general terms, there was hardly any push for it. So we were wondering what happened until we discovered, well, that's not the only factor, but until we discovered that the League of Governors had sent him a very strong position paper that they were opposing federalism because they thought that federalism would diminish their powers as governors.
Well,
In
obviously,
fact-
that would have been obviously not just self-interest, but clearly also lack of communication with them, no, of what in fact federalism will mean for them. It will empower them because they will be operating now under a much more powerful framework for collective leadership among the governors in any given region. Ewan ko lang kung bitin na intindihan yan.
All right. Father Ronnie, do you have any response to the other comments of our panelists?
No, I'm very grateful for the initiative started by Attorney Dindo and his colleagues. It's an initiative that I don't see to be in competition with the Puno draft. I think eventually there should be a way of harmonizing the beneficent provisions of both. I still think, however, that plenty of work, study, and debate went into the Puno draft. In respect to the expense that will be incurred in federalizing the government, let's think of it this way. The thick larder of fat that you now have in the national government will be trimmed down, and that's what's going to be used to finance the operations of the regional government. Now, in the immediate one thing I like with the parliamentary system, and I'm very grateful that Orion brought this out. No? By the way, Orion's the brother of my close friend Evelyn, brother-in-law. One thing is immediate accountability. Immediate accountability. Pag nagkapalpak ang isang secretary, Parliament can call him to task, and he loses his job because if the Prime Minister holds on to him, the whole government falls. Now, we also instituted in the Puno draft so-called proportional representation in order to diminish the adherence to personality-based politics. And proportional representation simply would allow the legislature to reflect the political sentiments of the people. One thing that we were very strong about was anti-dynasty provisions. So we expressly put a self-executing provision that prohibited dynasties up to the second degree of consanguinity and affinity. And also very strongly, we had a provision on the members of the same family in that office. Well, one reason why we did not remove the limitations outright was I'd like to let you in on this secret. When we said, akala ko ba gusto natin alisin lahat ng restrictive provisions na yan? And one member said, given the aggressiveness of China in acquiring property and acquiring holdings, are you not afraid that one day we might wake up and find out that everything is controlled by them? That was one fear expressed. I may not necessarily, well, I did share it, and it's a fear I have up to now, but that's one reason brought out. In the end, I'd like to say I very much am so grateful for this forum we had, and I hope we have more like this in the future. Thank you.
All right. I would like to get the response from Attorney Dindo. Attorney?
Thank you, Arnel. I'll try to make this very briefly. Kay Father Ronnie, maraming salamat I learned a lot from your presentation, and sana po in due time, probably very soon, we'll try to engage you again. And it's good to know po that you actually pushed for parliamentary system, collective rule, which is also what we are carrying. Kay Orion, thank you, Orion. Very forceful comments, especially on the investments. I just have, I agree. No? Yung sa, I learned this from a Euro lawyer, and I believe their systems there. Their emphasis is continuity. They have no term limits. And he was there was this lawyer. He was commenting. He said, the first time I got into this country, the first thing that struck me, which he found interesting, word na interesting. In other words, it's a diplomatic term na ano yan?
Kakaiba siya.
Interesting
Kakaiba.
interesting daw yung term limits natin. For them, they don't have that. Anyway, every 5 years you run for election. So if they don't like you, you will lose. Okay. So anyway, I get the point. Kung ako, if we leave term limits, personally, okay lang. But I explain ko lang yung term limits na dyan sa draft. That's actually based on feedback. Kasi nag-crowdsource, may feedback. Lahat sila ganun. Lahat ng feedback, walang so anyway,
it's coming from a Pinoy perspective. I think that's what's
Pinoy
happening.
Mentality. So,
it's coming from a Pinoy perspective.
It's 5 years times 3, that's 15 years. Baka pwede na.
Ang problema ko kasi in parliamentary system kasi a person who will become the prime minister kasi needs to move up the ranks, no? So for him to move up the ranks, he starts off as parang you start off as a low ranking para kang pawn sa chess tapos magiging queen ka. In fact, the queen piece in chess, by the way, is originally called the vizier or the prime minister. That's why when the pawn reaches the other side, he becomes a vizier or a queen, no? Pero kasi ang ang nangyayari, they have to move up the ranks. And kung may time limit sila na 15 years, baka yung taong nandun na sana, naubusan na ng term, hindi na siya pwedeng maging prime minister. Yun yung nangyayari. So that's the biggest concern. So I'm thinking, if we are going to have a term limit for the prime minister, who's called the president in this the people's draft, maybe for the lower ranking ones, yung mga MPs, di taasan, habaan natin, times 2 natin, para may leeway sila na they can move up the ranks from junior to become senior.
Anyway, Attorney Dindo, anything more?
Yes. I just have a few more comments. Kay Father Mercado, Father June,
yeah.
Hapon po, we really appreciate your participation today. And you said we need consultation. That is correct po. CSPS, clergy, security, polity, and civil society. If okay with you, moving forward, we would like to engage you, the group, for consultation and consensus building po. I just have some comments yung sa police. I get your point. There are actually 2 contending points there. One is police should be national. One, you should give it to the local. We will consider your statement po. Yun kasing position that it should be national. That's the prevailing position now of the security sector. But I guess if there's a good reason to change it, then let's discuss it. For now, compromise lang muna siya. Internal security force. That is used in the economic zone. That's a legal term. They are allowed internal security force. So baka pwede rin hong compromise yan. And then yun namang sa sultanates, basically, ang gusto lang naman ho namin is they are recognized as a social institution. If you look at the clause, we wrote it very carefully. In the clause in the professional draft, recognition is subject to the sovereignty of the people, integrity of the national territory, a patrimony of the nation, yung powers of the government, etc. In other words, there's actually nothing there except legal recognition. So, alam po namin yun na maraming contending, we actually deal with the Sulu Sultanate, marami ho sila doon, and hopefully from there we will move into the others. Alam po namin yung problema na there are so many sultanates right now wanting to be recognized. That's why we just put in a general clause. We leave that to Congress. Medyo mahirap ho talaga salain yun. Si Congress na lang ang gumawa nun. Hindi na namin kakayanin yun na isa-isahin na screen sila. Yun naman kung sa FDI, last point. No? I believe this was the point of the NEDA chief. Sabi niya na even if we have zero income tax, if there's a law that prohibits their entry, they will not come. Ako po yung part of my work actually is foreign investment regulation. 6040 comes with a criminal penalty. It is criminalized for them to actually come here. So hindi ho siya ganun kasimple na you just let them invite them. So ang feeling namin, kailangan whole approach po ito, no? Improve infrastructure, lower income tax, address corruption, and also change the law. Yun lang naman. Anyway, doon naman sa law is merong mga safeguards ho doon. There are at least 3 na nilagay ho namin doon sa People's Draft. Yun po kay Sir Gary, agree ho kami doon, ano, yung sa even the fact that government is considering system change, federal father. That's a good step already, at least for us, no? And then, of course, our approach is different, but this clause say as provided by law, we acknowledge that's in the right direction. We're just hoping that there's more, there are stronger efforts to that effect. Yun naman pong sa IRA, this is not in the People's Draft. Maybe you can correct me if I got it wrong, but IRA is based on the payment of VAT and income tax. In tax practice, you pay that in the head office. So if the head office is all in Metro Manila, those are the LGUs that will take the credit. So that's the law, from what I know. So we were looking at that, how one way to address that is to force the companies to move their principal office elsewhere, or force the companies to break up and establish many subsidiaries. But I mean, that's not very practical. So one way is probably when you distribute the IRA, you can probably consider the income generated by the branch office. Then you can distribute to the cities and the municipalities outside NCR. But I'm not sure exactly if that is I stated that is correct, so tax compliance. But that's one idea that we have. It's not in the People's Draft.
Can I answer that last point, attorney? No.
Yes, sir.
Those are 2 separate issues. No. One is the first issue that I've talked about was how to distribute the IRA among the different LGUs, and this is where revising the formula. Kasi ngayon, as you know, the formula, the criteria are only land size, population, and ano pangatlo? I think organization. What's the third one? Organization capacity or something like that. Now, we wanted to add things like financial capacity, resources, and so forth. So. And of course, relative economic state of the economy. So that way, yung mga mas mahihirap, mas maliliit, hindi naman sila dehado, doble dehado. Malit na nga sila, tapos malit pa siya nila sa IRA under the current formula. The other issue you've taken up has to do with the locations that should be credited for a given company's tax payments if that company has multiple jurisdictions. And that can be addressed by, we think, no, and that's also included in our draft, by the way, no. The company can continue to pay centrally. So collection is one aspect of that issue, and it continue to be paid centrally through BIR. But as far as the crediting, no, or the accrual of the credit for the tax, no, that can be distributed on the basis of where the taxes are earned or constructively earned, which is i.e. based on the location of the productive or of the taxable income creating activity of the company. And that can be easily tracked naman by management information systems right now. So si Exxon, halimbawa, nagbabayad pa rin siya ng tax sa Makati, sa BIR, pero yung crediting ng taxes, okay, for various purposes, for fiscal tracking, as well as for maybe for IRA allocation, okay, can be distributed throughout its different ang tawag dyan, regions in the country kung saan sila may stasyon. So, this is not difficult to do. Kaya lang, siyempre, may mga malalaking LGU dyan, like Makati, siguro would object to that. So these things can be addressed properly pa rin.
All right.
Salamat.
Maybe we can answer some questions sent by our audience. May nagtanong dito, what is the structure of federal governments? From kapatiran to, Norman Cabrera. I believe yung kay Attorney Dindo Donato sa People's Draft, parang parliamentary din siya, di ba? Council type?
Actually po, it's People's Draft leaves it open. It's just like in the BARM, no? There is an initiative from the region. They design their system, parliamentary ba yan? Presidential. It's up to them. The People's Draft simply gives a mechanism for them to go their own way. It does not prescribe an answer on how exactly yung powers. Everything will be whatever that proposal is, that will have to be approved by Congress anyway.
Yes. How about sa Bayanihan Draft? Nandito ba si Father Ronnie? Father Ronnie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I've lost my visuals.
Yes, ano raw po yung structure ng federal government?
Well, under the Biennial Constitution, there's going to be a federal governor. There's going to be a regional governor, a vice governor, and then a regional assembly that has full legislative powers insofar as the competence of the regional federated region is concerned.
Pero yung governors po are elected at large.
No, because if you elect the governors at large, what will happen is that the provinces with very big populations will elect the governor. So the governor will be elected by the regional assembly.
All right. So parang in a way, parang parliament siya within
Yes. In that way,
right.
yes.
Yes. Now I have another question. Maybe these are directed to the priest in our panel and also to Father Ronnie, Mr. Manuel Fernando. How can Catholics like you and me be able to promote our advocacy? Also, do you think that CBCP will be open to such changes when they're always saying, let's wait for the right leader? So how can they be convinced that the idea of reform is important? Should Catholics pitch in, or should Catholics, wala lang sa Catholics ito, or should Catholics be pushing for this constitutional?
Father June.
Okay, personally, I believe that all our Catholic schools, that the Catholic Education Association of the Philippines, can already begin the discussion on the Constitution. Because if we want to prepare for a constitutional change, I think we begin with the young people. And the schools, universities, colleges, and high schools should begin discussing the Constitution revision or amendment. That is a starting. Then the second very important also is that I think it requires a real dialogue. You see, I know there are bishops, as Father Ronnie said, that are opposing outright the change. But perhaps there are other reasons why they're opposing it. But not all of them. There are 80 or so active bishops. I know at least half of that will be open to charter change. And you start the dialogue. I think those who are proposing, Mindanao bishops are for charter change, but perhaps not at this time, the 1 year and a half. But they can begin already the debate, you see, for the charter change in the first 3 years of the next presidency. That's my point. And then the third, which is very important also in the charter change, there are many Catholic organizations that are very progressive. The Bishops' Business Conference is very influential. They can already begin all these dialogues in these institutions that are recognized both by the hierarchy and by the private sector, as well as by the educational sector. So begin there.
May I interject? May I ask Father June and maybe also Father Ronnie if they could share their contacts with us dito sa SEAP, pati na sa BCBC, so we can include them among the, we are in DILG scheduling a program of economic fora for the rest of the year. May we ask you to share, to help us connect with SEAP and with the Bishop Businessmen's Conference and other similar Catholic groups to set up
Gladly,
this.
Gladly.
Yes.
I will contact you.
I just want to clarify my previous answer. Ultimately, the form of government at the region, that depends on the people there and Congress. However, there's a default provision in the ordinance. A default lang po yun. They can follow it, they can disregard it. The default provision there is just like the parliamentary style or council type. Yun lang po.
All right. So now I think everyone has said their piece. And I think we've overextended already. So that's the only time we have. Again, I would like to thank our panelists, Mr. Orion Perez Dumdum, Father Eliseo June Mercado, Secretary Gary Olivar. Of course, I would also like to thank our presenters, Father Ronnie, Father Ranilio Aquino, and Attorney Dindo Donato. I hope this is not the last to see you. Magkaroon pa rin tayo ng similar conversation like this. Thank you so much for dedicating your time joining this forum and thinking about ways to help our country move forward in hopefully the near future. I would also like to thank our technical staff for organizing this event. Again, this presentation is brought to you by Tanggulang Demokrasya or Tandem in cooperation with Publicus Asia and APCA or the Association of Political Consultants in Asia. Lastly, I would like to thank everyone who listened to our forum and to all who will listen to our recording of this forum. We will try to have more of this kind of forums in the future as we hope to inform our countrymen about the different ways to improve the country's future through constitutional reform. With that, I would like to end this forum and I hope to see you again next time. Kong Hei Fat Choi. God bless.
恭喜发财.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much to everyone.
Bye-bye,
Bye.
everybody. Bye-bye, Orion. Bye-bye, Arnold.
Bye, Father Rani. Bye, Father June.
Bye-bye, Father Nadindo. Bye, Gary.
Bye, Dindo. Bye, Sec Gary.
We'll get in touch with you
Sige,
po.
Arnel.
Hopefully we can touch in with you, all of you, para move forward natin itong kind of reform.
Yes.
Indeed.
Thank you so much po. Maraming salamat.
Thank you.